I mean, I do think, every technology cycle comes with hype. That's just a very natural human thing. But I think the companies that do last are the ones that can kind of really truly deliver, right, on their promise.
Welcome to Culture and Code, a podcast about patterns in tech, business, and culture. I'm Inamoto, a creative entrepreneur and the founding partner of IronCode, a global innovation firm based in New York, Tokyo, and Singapore.
Cool, and I'm Tara Tan, managing partner of Strange Ventures. We're an early stage firm that invests in the future of computing.
So this is a podcast we've been talking about. We've tested
for
a
a while.
few recording sessions, but this is the official first episode that you and I are recording. So how are you?
Excited to be here. I feel like we're entering the end of summer. You
Yeah.
see all the Halloween stuff coming out, but it feels like the
Already.
world of, yeah, already. But feels like the
crazy.
world of AI has not stopped. I think last week was a
No.
record. We had like 3 to 4 product launches, which
Okay.
is totally insane.
Yeah,
So it feels like
definitely.
it's not stopped.
Yeah. So speaking of which, in this podcast, we try to decode the biggest shifts in culture and tech. And the topic that we want to cover is inspired by one of the newsletters that you wrote recently, quality versus hype. And in that newsletter, you talked about this startup that I don't think gets a lot of headlines, but it's apparently making already $1 billion a year. It's been around for about 5 years or so, and it's this company called Surge. So why don't you give a quick 101 on who that company is and why you decided to mention in your newsletter, and then we can go into this topic or about quality over hype or quality versus hype in tech and just, culture at large.
Yeah, I love this story so much. So I first found out about them through The Information, which is a great tech publication that's around. So Surge AI is a data labeling services company. We never hear about them. They were started 5 years ago. They have over $1 billion in revenue or more, raised $0 in venture funding. So they were entirely bootstrapped. And their closest competitor is Scale AI, which is obviously very famous, very known. And what's surprising for me was that, compared to what Scale AI has raised in terms of venture funding, this team is entirely bootstrapped. They actually make more than Scale AI. I think Scale AI makes about 850 million a year, and they make about 1 billion. And they do the same services. And I think what's different about Surge is that they really emphasize very human, high quality, nuanced data labeling for training data for model makers. And I think in that interview that was mentioned in my newsletter, he talked about how, a lot of data labeling services is treated like, kind of you throw humans at the problem, bring them overseas. And he shared this story where when he was building a sentiment model at Twitter before Surge AI, they thought, okay, to do a sentiment analysis model, they would just go through like whatever, 10,000 tweets and mark them positive or negative. But it's more nuanced than that. Humans are much more nuanced than that, right? It's hard to say if this is a truly positive or negative based on if you don't know the cultural context, which is so interesting. So its entire company, Surge, is built around building high quality, very nuanced data sets, which I think is fascinating. And I think that bleeds over to the world of AI and product and more today. I'm curious about what resonated for you there, Ray.
Yeah. So I didn't know about this company until I read the name in your newsletter. And from there, I happened to watch the interview, one of the few interviews that he's given publicly. And I had no idea who he was. I had no idea who the company was. And so just to give a little bit of dimension about what quality of data means, one example that he used as a way to talk about the nuance of data and particularly language. So let's say if I say, oh, he's such a badass, right? In a colloquial sense, I use that as a compliment to talk about somebody. But linguistically, in a literal way, bad is negative. So with a language model might annotate that as a negative comment. So what seems so intuitive for a human to understand a language, for machine, something as basic as simple as, oh, he's such a badass or something like
Right.
computer has a very difficult, machines have a hard time decoding that type of nuance. And, he just used that, something like that as an example of what he means by the quality of data. So that was one thing that I sort of knew, like what he meant by quality of data, but that example was a good example. Another thing that struck me, and then the reason why we decided to use that as an entry point for today's conversation, quality versus hype, is something that is as mundane or as simplistic as a nuance in a language is very difficult for machines to decipher. And sort of this, I'm going on a tangent, but I happened to come across a couple of clips this past weekend, and it was a trailer for Dragon Ball. And
Okay.
Dragon, that the famous
Yeah.
anime. It's a Japanese anime that's been around for, it was around when I was a kid in Japan,
Yeah.
so like 30 plus
Yeah,
years
Coco.
ago. And over the past like 2 decades or so, it's become international. And it's been around in the global market long enough that some people might not even know that it's a Japanese anime, right? And that this trailer was for a new version of Dragon Ball in theaters.
Okay.
But two things. One, it was fake. And two, it was created by AI. So
Nice. Oh my
I'm
God.
sure some guy used,
Yeah.
I don't know, VO or Midjourney or what have you to create this 2-minute trailer. And he had multiple of those trailers all around Dragon Ball. And most of them had like several million views. Yeah. But at the same time, I watched it and within 10 seconds, I'm like, if you see like a second,
Right.
1 second clip, it looks quite amazing. But then quickly you realize that like there doesn't seem to be a captivating story behind it.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if he was creating these trailers as a way to get more views, just to, I don't know, get advertising, for his channel, most likely, because it became pretty clear just by going through the comments that there's no Dragon Ball movie coming up. Yeah. But the reason why I bring it up is like that sort of quote unquote quality of data, like I, as a human being, was able to decipher it pretty quickly. But like for a machine, I think it would be pretty difficult to spot like why this is good versus not great,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah. So going back to Surge and what they're doing, there's a lot of hype when it comes to data, LLM, and AI companies. And I think there are a lot of companies that are managing to raise a lot of money, but just watching his interview, listening to his interview, I think there's a lot of hype right now. And I wonder when that hype, the curtain of that hype will be revealed sooner or later.
I
Or
mean,
when
yeah.
that could be. Yeah.
I mean, I do think, every technology cycle comes with hype. That's just a very natural human thing. But I think the companies that do last are the ones that
Yeah.
can kind of really truly deliver, right, on their promise. Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, this podcast is named Culture and Code. And I think this example really captures exactly what's going on. Like culture is living.
Yeah.
And, code is really trying to encode as much of that living culture as much as possible. And you can kind of see that counterculture as well. Like, right now, I think, it's cultural, right? If you want to compliment someone, you actually give them an
Yeah.
insult, right? Have you heard
Yeah.
of this? Right?
No,
It's like,
no.
you're funny, don't go bald. It's like,
Oh,
it's kind
right,
of
right,
like
right, right.
so it's like a double. And that is I think that's very hard for machines to they decode. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. And I do think that there's going to be increasingly in our culture, a way to proof of human is going to be
Yeah.
key,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, there was this news that broke maybe a couple weeks, couple months ago, of employees who are not real, who have been applying for
Hmm.
top AI companies, and
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
right, and they're actually taking multiple positions, and then someone at some point realized, like, wait, this person has been scamming all of us.
Yeah.
And I do think like, these sort of things within our culture is going to be closer and closer to like proof of human, right? Which
Mm,
is kind of interesting. Can you
mm.
tell if they're a human or they're a bot?
Yeah. I would even say, machine versus human or bot versus human. But even within the spectrum of different types of humans and within the spectrum of the intelligence of human beings,
Right.
right? And going back to Serge and the interview that I watched, he talked quite a bit about the quality of the talent that he hires. And there are too many, I guess maybe it's a Silicon Valley term, body shops, meaning that companies and startups that are just hiring like crazy and they're just hiring bodies and not enough like real talent. Yeah.
Yeah. For the search engine example, it's really a thinly veiled kind of hit at like places like Scale. Because Scale is very famous for
Yeah.
farming out the work to very cheap labor overseas, essentially.
Oh, wow.
Very cheap labor. So they pay them like $1 a day or something crazy. Like I think it's all online. It's, pay them extremely cheap labor
Mm,
to
mm.
do massive amounts of data labeling.
I see,
So
I
he
see, I
calls
see.
them body shops. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think like what he was talking about is in addition to like cheap labor
Yeah.
that they might outsource, but also like expensive labor, i.e., like PhDs from,
Right.
MIT, Stanford,
Right.
Yale, Harvard, Princeton. And these companies would hire PhD just because they have PhD in data management or data science
Sure.
or machine learning or computer science. But just because you have a PhD in physics or math doesn't mean that you are a good computer programmer. And he talked about computer code as poetry,
Right.
you know? So the reason why I'm bringing that up is there's the difference between machines and humans, but also difference in humans, obviously. But what I'm getting at is I think the level of creativity and the humanness will become more and more. It might take time, but just because you can program doesn't mean that you can program well or, you know, write poetry as if
Totally.
you're code. And
Yeah.
that's between creative programmer versus, you know, run of the mill programmer.
I totally agree. I mean, I think the bar for craft is going to be higher. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's craft in everything. You and I know this, right?
Yes.
Coming from a creative background. So there's design craft. I mean, everything
Yeah.
has a craft. Even data labeling is a craft.
Mm.
And the Surge AI folks definitely think of it that way, right? Investing is a craft. I would say even being able to craft or, build a great RAG model or, some sort of reasoning system is a craft. Because I
Mm.
think that kind of comes out. And I think, it's easy to say, oh, AI will automate everything. And yes, it does make things a lot easier in terms of the tooling. But I think the bar for craft is higher than ever. People talk
Wait,
about taste, people talk about, oh, I think it's craft. I really think it is
when
craft.
you say craft, but in the context of technology, let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you mean when you say craft? I think like craft in the context of like design, film, writing, fashion might be a bit more obvious, but in the context of tech, what do you mean by craft?
I mean, we should pull that in because I do think that abstraction from, craftsmanship, which
Yeah.
is very sort of, I would say Japanese culture is very much an embodiment of that. Even your coffee shops, some of them have high craft
Yeah.
and they pour a ton of craft into that,
Yeah.
right? Whether they're really thinking beyond what was taught into digging into what I say is first principles thinking. How do
Mm,
you make a great cup of coffee? Is it the beans?
mm,
Is it the temperature? Is it the process? There's an investigation beyond like the obvious steps
yeah.
to like very first principles thinking.
Yeah.
What makes
Yeah.
a great cup of coffee? And I would say like that sort of similar attitude or approach.
Mm,
Let's go back to first principles thinking. What makes a great, sort of training data set? Kind of
mm,
comes down to that. What makes
mm,
a great system that can serve this company or this customer, XYZ? Like,
mm,
I feel like that kind of comes down to for very first principles thinking. what
Mm,
makes really great is sort of a post-training sort of, process. And
mm,
there's all sort of thinking that is required, I feel.
mm.
And that's for me craft. For me,
Yeah,
yeah.
I may be going off topic, but I'll bring it back. But you brought up coffee shops in Japan,
Yeah.
right? And what makes great coffee? Obviously, the quality of beans and how you brew the beans or coffee. But like one place to look for craftsmanship is how clean the countertop or the kitchen is where you make coffee.
Okay.
And I'll give you two examples. So I grew up in a household where my dad was a woodworker. So my dad, when I was like 2 or 3 years old, he started a company, a furniture company, using Japanese woodworking craftsmanship to make furniture, dishware, and all the way to architecture. And it was really, I remember I must have been, I don't know, less than 10 years old. And I went down to his shop, woodworking shop, and he was like, "Oh, you gotta make sure where you work is clean first.
Yeah.
Like, wipe the table, just organize all the tools before you start working." And I found it so ironic because at home he was the messiest person. Yeah, yeah. So, and that was like when I was about 10, and then not too long ago, I happened to be listening to a podcast about this sushi chef, Jiro. And there's this famous documentary called The Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
Yeah.
And he's probably the
Yes.
most famous Japanese sushi chef because, his documentary was on Netflix and, it was one of the most popular Netflix shows many years ago. But in it, he talks about his kitchen I guess somebody talks about his kitchen and it's the cleanest kitchen that you ever see because he makes sure that there's like nothing on his kitchen counter and where he works to sort of interrupt his workflow. So, and the reason why I bring it up is it goes back to the point about craftsmanship, but also the purity and the cleanness of data and like where you work and what you work with. If it's not clean, then what comes out on the other end won't clean.
Yeah.
So it's this garbage in, garbage out
Right. Yeah.
topic, right? Yeah. And but also like the way you make it, and this goes back to the point about craftsmanship, is that I think you need to be obsessed with not just not just shipping the product out, but how you make it and where you make it, has to have that level of craftsmanship to make sure that the output has quality as well. So it's the
That's right.
quality of data, quality of input, and then the quality of how and where you work that guarantees the quality of the output.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there's like interesting, tension here where, especially in startup or tech culture, craft has been seen as slow, which I think is not true. I think there's like a
Mm,
misunderstanding about craft.
mm,
So when someone says, oh, they're very, they're sort of very craft oriented, sometimes it feels like, oh, it's very different from like startup speed, like throw everything against the wall, like doesn't matter how you get there, just get there.
yeah.
And it's sort of an interesting tension here where it's like very craft sort of oriented kind of approach where they're like demanding perfection over everything
Yeah.
versus like messiness, speed, and all of that. And I don't think they're actually quite different. I do think that both have value. So if you
Mm,
like Bowl, Apple's a very great example of a craft first
yeah.
organization in what they
Yeah.
did. Right.
Yeah.
And it's still enduring to its day. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So on that note, I'm gonna switch our
Yeah.
conversation to the next topic that we talked about. We said that we would talk about, which is the recent launch of GPT-5. And I'm wondering, is ChatGPT or OpenAI as a company, are they more focused on speed and even hype versus quality or craft?
That's a big one. I mean, they're getting slammed. They're getting slammed right now because GPT-5 wasn't the technical breakthrough that a lot of people expected. So it was quite underwhelming from a technical point of
Right,
view.
right, right.
Like everyone's like performance benchmarks kind of sucked. If it's not in thinking mode, it actually can't solve like a lot of basic math stuff. So I would say that there's there. I mean, whereas you compare it to the recent sort of releases from the other model makers have performed, really well. So I think there was a
Yeah,
little bit of an underwhelming kind of like feeling from this launch
yeah.
from GPT-5. However, I thought what was interesting that what OpenAI did is that they are starting to productize or take a productized approach to their model. So
What do you
what
mean by
GP
that? Say more?
yeah, so what GPT-5 did, what was interesting was that they, number one, collapsed all the models. Previously you had like 3.5,
Yeah,
4.0 for reasoning,
yeah,
03 for, no, so 040 and then 03 for reasoning, and all of that you can kind of choose between the
yeah.
model. Right now, if you send in, it's only GPT-5. So they
Right,
collapsed
right.
all of it, which means that what they have done is to abstract all the different models, types of models
Mhm.
under the hood so that when you put in a query, part of that response is trying to figure out which model should it route to.
Right, right.
For what kind of capabilities do you need to answer this question better? So that for me is productization. So you have that. And then now, you can do things like, oh, for the developers, change, between like how verbose do you want it? How much more reasoning do you want it? How quick answer do you want it? So I feel like it's more of a productization approach. Obviously, there's still a lot of kinks to work through. Like, I don't think
Mm.
they did it very well. But what I'm seeing is that, it becomes more around usability of the model
Yeah.
versus just technical breakthrough. That was my sense for GPT-5. It's also a little bit more aesthetic, so they actually try to bake in
Yeah,
a lot more taste
yeah,
into it,
yeah,
which is quite interesting. But again, I think this is more about UX or DX, user experience,
yeah.
developer experience, than a technical breakthrough.
Technical breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and subsequently, ChatGPT, so going back to the quality versus hype
Yeah.
conversation where we started, there's a decent amount of quality in what they do, but they also try to create hype just by releasing models after models. And OpenAI and some Altman, I think, are quite skilled at creating a narrative for OpenAI as a company and as a brand. Because to your point, the capabilities of ChatGPT, if you compare that to other models out there, yeah, some in some capacity, ChatGPT might perform better, but in a lot of other capacities, other models perform better. But in the public's psyche and in culture, if you ask people outside of the Silicon Valley, US West Coast tech bubble, like 95% of people might associate AI or ChatGPT is AI.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
absolutely. Mind
my
share.
dad would,
Yeah.
my dad would know ChatGPT, but he has no idea about any of the
Right.
other models.
Right.
Yeah. So OpenAI and Sam Altman have been able to create hype around AI as a topic, but also ChatGPT and OpenAI as a brand so that it takes more mind share in culture and they are able to, and then I think like the release of GPT-5 or any of the previous models were to feed the narrative that OpenAI is dominating in the AI race, while in reality, the difference between what they make versus what Google makes versus what Anthropic makes may not be as big of a gap as at least the awareness and the recognition that OpenAI gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think for what they're doing, harnessing capital, a big part of the play, huge part of the play.
Mm.
Like for a company like that, it's impossible to be bootstrapped, right? So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
harnessing capital and talent is a big one. And they're going up against, your Metas, your Googles of the world, which what it feels like infinite capital. Obviously, it's not infinite, but it feels like it's infinite
Yeah, yeah,
capital.
yeah.
With Meta, there's no sort of lobbying $200 million paychecks for the best researchers, which is crazy. Yeah, so
It's
I feel like,
crazy.
it's like, that was a great, I can't remember which is the op-ed I read, but it was, sort of this idea, and I totally sort of resonated with it, which is hype as infrastructure. Like hype is a essential tool
Mm,
for the likes of these companies to really harness capital, resources, attention, and talent as they
yeah,
get into that race.
right,
But it's interesting. I mean, you have like the Surge AI, which is totally, they kind of just did work really well and then they sort of won over time.
yeah,
But I'm curious if that's gonna, sort of still stay true in the model maker race. I mean, you have a couple of those right now that are doing that, where they're a little
yeah,
bit more stealthy. They've raised capital, but they're stealthy and they're,
yeah,
we'll see. We'll see.
yeah.
But
But the story like her Surge is an encouraging. I would like
yeah,
to see more of those stories.
yeah.
I mean, OpenAI is kind of an anomaly in that space, and it's sucking all of the air out of the press, especially. And companies like Surge don't get mentioned a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
but like over time, my hope is that the quality. I mean, there's always hype, and hype is something that I think is. I don't want to necessarily say easier to generate, but I think there are a lot of people, whether you're in Silicon Valley or outside of Silicon Valley, outside of the rest of the world, just doing jazzy hand to create hype, to raise money or to get attention. I think it's something that I think a lot of companies and a lot of people do. But yeah, like the story like Surge is something that A is encouraging and B, I would love to see more of, not just in tech, but in other places as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would
Yeah.
say that there probably are. It's just that we don't hear about them because they don't need hype as much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think hype is a powerful lever for capital right now, whether it's in the
Yeah,
private
definitely.
markets or in the public markets, same thing. So, yeah. But yeah, I do agree. I think that there's probably more surges out there that we don't know of. But,
Yeah.
that might change very shortly. Yeah.
Just to kind of wrap up the conversation, I'll just bring up an example that's completely outside of tech.
Great.
A company that I came across relatively recently. It's a company called Jack Marie Marsh.
Okay.
Have you heard of them?
No.
It's a sunglass company,
Okay.
and
Sunglasses. Yeah.
it's yeah, sunglasses. Yeah, and it's based in LA, and it was started by a guy, a designer, an industrial designer, and he decided to make sunglasses, but super high end. And I think they launched about 10 years ago, and they've been flying under the radar. But in recent years, they started to get quite a bit of traction because of their pressing, like in the fashion industry and the movie stars wearing and the
Yeah.
stylists choosing their sunglasses. But each pair costs like $2,000,
Okay. Wow.
and
Yeah.
it's made in Japan. And what they do is on purpose, they only make small lots. So like they only produce, let's say 50 pairs of this model or 50 pairs of that model,
Mm.
and then they quickly sell out. Yeah. So their business model is A, quality, and B, less about
Underhyped.
underhype,
Underhyped.
underhyped, but it's leading to hype.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Underhyped
So
is
it's,
a very powerful thing too, for
yes.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of counterintuitive, especially like in a world like fashion, where
Mm.
you want as much as hype as possible. But this company, kind of like Surge, decided to double down on quality and your earlier point about craftsmanship. And yeah, they've been around for 10 years, so it's not a short period of time, but like that obsession with quality is paying off.
I love that story. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing it.
yeah.
Well,
So
I'll see you next week.
yeah, so this is a good place to end. Quality over hype, and I
Yeah.
think we are leaning towards quality, even though hype is kind of inescapable.
I think the debate remains open, but I think it's definitely
Yeah.
interesting times. I love that story about the sunglasses company.
All right. Sounds
Yeah.
good. So yeah,
See
we'll
you soon.
put these links in the show notes and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.